Inventor, author, independent scientist, James Lovelock works out of a barn-turned-laboratory in the English countryside. He's best known as the father of Gaia theory, the idea that all parts of our planet, living and non-living, form a complex interacting system, like a single organism. His latest book depicts Gaia in peril. The Earth as we know it is vanishing, and this is James Lovelock's final warning.
Jim, thanks very much for joining us. It's a remarkable year for you because you'll have your 90th birthday and many happy returns, and you're also going to become a spaceman. How did you come to be a 90-year-old spaceman?
Well, it was rather funny, really. A friend of mine in America sent me an urgent message saying, "Hey, do you know Richard Branson is going to be advertising biofuels under the title Gaia Biofuels for Virgin Airlines." And I thought, what? Can't do that. So I sent him an email saying, look, you can't do this. It's almost as bad as me opening a chain of brothels and calling it Virgin. I got back the nicest reply from Richard Branson. He obviously found it very funny and said he had not the slightest intention of sort of screwing up the Gaia name, because he'd been a fan for donkey's years, and then added, what would you think about having a trip into space next year or sometime?
Would you ever, in your youth, have thought I might be an astronaut one day?
No, not in my wildest dreams. I mean, so what a wonderful thing to happen when you're 90. No, terrific.
But some people will say that it's a somewhat environmentally reckless thing to do, to burn lots of fuel to lift some people 100 kilometres up above the Earth.
Well, anybody who says that, I think, well, either gravely misguided or else a damned hypocrite. Because if you gave them the chance then, and they were of that inclination, they'd take it.
But on a sad note, I mean, your current book is extremely pessimistic, I think, about where the planet is going because of the carbon crisis, the climate crisis, what you call global heating, which is a much tougher term than global warming. Do you think that in 90 years' time, at the end of the 21st century, do you think there'll still be people going into space?
I think it's very unlikely.
You think we're going to lose that sort of technological capability?
I think we'd be far too busy surviving to have the time or the money or the energy to do it. And it won't be considered that important then.
So do you think you may be one of the last spacemen?
It's a possibility. But I don't think the tough times are coming next year or in the next 10 years even. I think it's a little further down the track. But when it comes, I suspect it'll be very rapid indeed.
One of the things I found interesting about the modelling work you talk about in the book is that it's the opposite of looking darkest just before the dawn. It might look brightest just before the fall of night. Because you say that it may look as though the biological systems are doing most just before they effectively conk out.
Absolutely. And the reason for this is quite simple. As soon as the system grows unstable, it goes into positive feedback. And as the positive feedback strengthens, then any small perturbation in either direction gets amplified. Mm-hmm. So a tendency to cooling will give you a real cold winter, and a tendency towards heating a real hot summer, until finally it goes flip. So right the way up to its hot state.
So when some people look at the cold weather this winter and say, oh, maybe not so much, then you look at it and say more extremes because the system is becoming stressed and more sensitive.
Yes.
So you were saying about the fact that scientists work in an institutional setting, in a political setting. You, of course, famously don't. You became an independent scientist. But I have done. I know, but you became an independent scientist, what, about half your life ago?
Yes, it would be in 1964.
And that's clearly worked out very well for you. Do you think people like, well, Richard Branson or Bill Gates or the boys at Google, would you say what you should do is just set some money on some people so they can go out and be independent scientists?
No, that's the last thing to do. Give them a big pot of money and just go and have a good time. Or worse.
But you've had a good time.
Well, I know, but it wasn't just by spending money. Mm-hmm. I spent my last 3 years as a full professor at Baylor College of Medicine, with an enormous salary.
Which is in Texas, yes?
Texas, yes. But the awful thing was that I had an almost unlimited pot of money to spend on equipment. And they were the 3 most unproductive years of my life. We just bought larger and larger and more exciting pieces of gear and then spent all our time playing with them. And it only dawned on me towards the end of that period that, of course, they were about 5 years out of date. The inventions on which they were based take that time to reach even the forefront of the manufacturer's sale. So if you just go out and invent something simple, you're naturally miles ahead of the game. And this was one of the impetuses that drove me to going into independence.
Do you still tinker with things in your workshop?
Oh, you bet.
Interesting, you planted, what, about 20,000 trees about 20
Not
years
personally.
No.
I only planted, I suppose, about 1,000 or so. And that was quite enough. It gives me all sorts of carbon trading bonus points.
You should
for
definitely
flying.
cash in.
That pays for my trip into space more than over.
You now think you should just let that land grow back into scrub and wood?
Absolutely. You see, this is the trouble with not only the climate science, but also green philosophy and green action. They theorize all the time and never do experiments. Now, people seem to have forgotten that experiment and observation are at least half of science, and it's being neglected. And this is an example. They say, isn't it good to plant trees? Have they tried it? Well, when you do try it, you soon find out it isn't a good idea at all. And the reason it isn't is that you can't plant an ecosystem. An ecosystem contains everything from bacteria up through amoebae, nematodes, insects, invertebrates, all the way up to giant trees. And you can't plant that. No way. It has to come naturally. And much more important than that, as the climate changes, as it is now, the ecosystem adapts beautifully. The plantations don't. As soon as the climate becomes unfavourable, they die.
You talk in the book, as I said, it is in some ways, I think, a pessimistic book, which is not necessarily to say an unrealistic book, about a vastly decreased human population. But you also say that one thing that we should be considering as a possible counterweight to that, geoengineering, about ways of taking the edge off the temperature increases, the heating that we see going on around us. It seems to me you have a slightly ambivalent attitude to geoengineering.
Well, Oliver, we're all a bit ambivalent. It's in our natures. And I'm an inventor, and that's very much my life. So naturally, I'm interested in geoengineering, and I think they're all things worth trying because they'll produce results in the way of observations and that'll tell us more about the Earth. So it's worth it from that point of view. But the other thing is, I think there is an outside chance that one procedure could really turn back the clock on global warming, and that is burying carbon. All you have to do is to get every farmer everywhere to make a profit by turning all of his ag waste into char and burying it or dropping it in the sea, doesn't matter which, because char is not only resistant to atmospheric oxidation, it's non-biodegradable too, so it'll just stay there.
But overall, Jim, what I find slightly puzzling about your book, given how engaged with the world you are, there's a certain sanguine approach to thinking of, in your ideas, billions of people dying. And is it because it's just too vast a thought to expend compassion? I'd like to push you a little bit on that.
Well, please do. No, it's a thing that's concerned me deeply. Obviously, it has to. But then, on the other hand, I think it's part of human nature, at least it used to be when I was young. If you heard there'd been a famine in China and 1 million people had died, you cared about that less than if your dog had died. And it's just, we don't get all that steamed up about people who are not familiar to us. But it happens, and it's happened. And don't forget that in the Earth's history, while humans have been on the planet, that's about 1 million years, there have been 7 major climate events of this kind. And I think the geneticists say that at one of those events, we were reduced to a mere 2,000 individuals, the bottleneck genetic bottleneck. If that's true, then they are very violent events indeed.
Mm-hmm.
And the one up ahead looks every bit as violent, if not more so, than the ones that have happened in the past. So I may be underestimating the death toll, not overestimating.
Despite this accepting this terrible death toll, this terrible dieback, you're also, in an odd way, I feel, more positive about humans and their relationship to Gaia than you have been sometimes in the past. You think humans really do add something to the planet?
No, not yet. Early on in the evolution of life on Earth, as is so beautifully described in your book, Oliver, Eating the Sun, photosynthesizers appeared with this remarkable capacity to split water using sunlight, and a quite complicated series of biochemical reactions. And they flourished. But their waste product, oxygen, was in those times not a very nice gas to put out. In many ways about as nasty as something producing chlorine now. But we all got used to it. I think that we are like humans, just like those photosynthesizers at the beginning. We've discovered intelligence, if you like, or acquired it, but we have it. And it's a very powerful capacity, communicating intelligence, and it's enabled us through industrial development and inventions to do all sorts of earth-shaking things. And many of them are damaging, just as oxygen was. But I think that the system will adapt, and that there is a possibility that humans have a huge future, because they are as desirable to the planet in many ways as the photosynthesizers were. So there are descendants way down the tracks, could be the kind of animals that make the whole planet intelligent and possibly extend its lifespan significantly.
Do you have any hope that we could actually short-circuit the system and get wise and thoughtful without the suffering?
Well, I've thought about this a great deal, Oliver, and it might be possible if by some exceedingly illegal and amoral kind of setup you selected the best, or what you thought were the best of humans at the moment, and formed them into a small society somewhere, that you might be able to dream up ways of doing these things and doing it now. But we can't do that for all sorts of reasons, and we are what we are. We're the average, and intelligence varies as much as height does.
But with what little intelligence we have now, we can look back on the planet, and we can send people who look back on the planet up in spacecraft after their 90th birthdays. And that's some sort of achievement.
Exactly. Well, it's something we can do.
Jim, thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Oliver, for some very nice questions.